Okay, Sonia?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, members, and welcome to any members of the public or other councillors watching the Rochford District Council's Remote Planning Policy Committee meeting. Item number 1 of the agenda is apologies for absence. Do we have any apologies so far, Sonia?
No, Chairman.
Okay. I think we seem to be short of Councillor Hoy, but I haven't seen anything, so hopefully he will join us as we go along. Item number 2, non-members attending.
Chairman, we have Councillors Ward, Gooding and Wilkinson.
Thank you very much. Agenda item 3, the minutes of the meeting held on the 2nd of October. Are minutes agreed, members? Anybody?
Agreed.
Agreed. Anybody not in agreement, please indicate by raising your blue hand. I don't see any hands. Right, agenda item 4 is any declarations of interest, please, members. Don't see anything there, Sonia. Okay, we'll move on to agenda item number 5, which is the new local plan evidence base housing and economic land availability assessment, or as it's now known, HELA, H-E-L-A-A. This will be presented by Daniel Goodman, Team Leader Strategic Planning. Over to you, Daniel.
Thank you, Councillor Spearing. So this item is obviously on a piece of evidence that's commonly referred to as the HELA. So in summary, it's an assessment of parcels of land and their overall suitability for development. It's quite an important piece of evidence to inform the local plan, because obviously it allows you to understand how much land is likely to be available for development in the context of meeting your housing and employment needs, but also to draw some general conclusions about how suitable and viable different pieces of land are likely to be. So this study has been commissioned and completed. It forms a partial update of the last HELA in 2017, in that it does not reassess sites from that study. But its overall conclusions are that across both studies, that there is sufficient land to deliver around 4,300 houses on sites that would meet current policy. The vast majority of those are existing allocations, such as the land north of London Road or land at Hall Road. But obviously there are some other sites in there in the urban area, long-term opportunity sites like Rochford Police Station, that also contribute to that figure. And I think this study itself actually only identified a supply of around 112 additional dwellings. So, and the main reason for that is that the vast majority of sites assessed in it do fall in the green belt, where obviously it's not possible to say at this time that they would be suitable. So I suppose that's all I'd probably say on it. I'm happy to take obviously any questions, but it is quite a technical piece of work that's clearly important in understanding land availability. But I think, as we've discussed previously, it doesn't set policy, it doesn't bind the council to any decisions, and it clearly doesn't create any greater chance of a site being granted planning permission than otherwise would be the case.
Yes, as you say, Daniel, this is the result of 2 working groups with suitable amendments to clarify various situations that have been highlighted by members. But I see Councillor Mrs Mason would like to ask a question. Over to you, Councillor Mrs Mason.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. It's not so much a question as an observation and a concern, one I've raised before, which has been partially addressed. 2.4, it says report to which this report relates to has therefore been commissioned jointly with South Northsea Borough Council for economies of scale to provide a robust specialist assessment of the availability and general suitability of land in Rochford District. Whilst I accept that there was nothing wrong with that being done, I still think that it's poor that that decision wasn't made by members, and in more particularly members of the committee, but was left to officers to determine whether or not we do a joint Hella and who with. I would like it recorded that for future Hellas and future commissioning, reports of this nature where we're linking in with another authority should be decided by members and not by officers. I understand they've got the financial wherewithal to do so, but I think this is a policy decision that should be made by our policy makers.
Thank you, Councillor Mrs. Mann. I think we've already agreed that what you've just said, we took on board when you raised it on the first occasion and said that in future we would have input into this situation. I think it was also highlighted the reason we did it with Southend on this occasion was because we were both at the same sort of level of progression to our local plans. That was the thought behind it. But as I say, I know when you raised it before, I think we agreed there and then that in future members would be involved in any decision making of this nature. Councillor Hoy.
Can that be recorded then? Because
yes, you can. We can record that, Councillor Mrs. Mason. Councillor Hoy.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Apologies for joining late. A little bit of a problem on my end, I'm afraid. I caught the back end of that. I assume we are on item 5 at the moment, hopefully.
Yes.
Fingers crossed. Yes, good. There's just something I caught the back end of Daniel's presentation as well, and it's something I was looking at within there, and it's possibly linked to other things I brought up within working groups. That the header doesn't bind us to anything. It's just considering the land that has been put forward. However, in the actual report, it comments on the basis of deliverability still. On page 5.53, sorry, it's all mucked up a bit.
I think, I mean,
deliverable, and this is where I think people really get confused over what we are still referring. I know there's been additional wording put in, but I still think when you're saying something's deliverable and developable, it doesn't suggest that it's not being put in stone at that point.
I think, Councillor Hoy, we can go round in circles on this one. I think we've tried to clarify it as clearly as we can. These are, as I understand it, the words that you have to use for this sort of legislation, and that's why we've had to leave it in. But that's why we put in the explaining statements at the beginning of all these documents that this is not council policy, etc., but is the routing that we are wording we have to use. Is that correct? Pretty much, Daniel?
Yes, Chair. So it's part of the MPPF, but also the planning practice guidance that relates to HELAs specifically. It is, if you like, mandatory that land is categorised based on those definitions, and it's the basis upon which these kind of studies are done is categorising land as to whether it is deliverable, developable, or neither. And so I think, the explanatory text hopefully goes some way to resolving that. But, even if we would want to, I don't think we could transplant that text for anything else, just purely because that would move us out of sync with the guidance that relates to these assessments.
Thank you very much. Do you want to come back, Mrs. Mason?
Sorry, could I come back there, please, Chairman? I understand your perhaps frustration with me in saying what I've said, but obviously this is the first public meeting that this has been in, and that's why I'm raising it at this point.
Yeah. Yep. Okay. Councillor Mrs. Mason, do you want to come back?
Yes, I would like to come back, and I agree with what Councillor Hoy said. The fact that you've had private meetings doesn't mean that things shouldn't be discussed in public. But going back to the issue of deliverability and developable, which is clearly, I accept with the officer, is clearly explained in 3.7. Nevertheless, we are being asked to note this report. I wonder to accommodate it, but we're told it doesn't bind us. It's only for information based. It's an evidence-based report, which is in there. But could we have some of that wording where it says that it holds no status, which is, I accept in the report, but could we have that in the paragraph where we're noting it, so that we're noting it with on the understanding that it has no status as part of the development plan? And I think that would accommodate the concerns of some of us that relate to this report, and also make it very clear for members of the public.
Can I just come back? Councillor Mrs. Mason, we haven't been having any private meetings. We've been having working groups of which you were present. So we haven't had any private meetings.
Working groups are not open to the public.
This is Councillor Mrs. Mason. This has all been in the working group, as you are aware.
And I wasn't aware.
This is the first time that we have had this opportunity to bring what the presentations from the working group to the full committee.
Right, I apologise, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, if you don't like the use of the word private, but working groups are not open to the public, nor are their notes. So therefore, I'll change the terminology to working groups, and I think we need some transparency on such an important documentation.
But
I would repeat my request that the recommendation that it proposes that this committee resolves to note the HELA, it is noting that it has no status as part of the development plan, because I think that will make things clearer both to members that are not perhaps as familiar with the terminology as some others, and also to members of the public. I think we need to have things as clearly as possible. If you disagree, Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry, but that's my proposal.
Well, I am sorry, because we've had two working groups where we've tried to iron out the wordings that we needed to clarify these situations. As far as I'm aware, everything that was put forward to Mr. Goodman to make amendments to have been included in the wording that we proposed. And therefore, there is a proposal at the end of paragraph 9.1 on page 5.4 that the recommendation is that the committee resolves to note the HELA at Appendix A and publish it on the council's website.
I would,
if I may, Chairman, I would like to second.
I haven't seen the documentation other than that's on the public website because of issues that the council's well aware of. But I'm not going.
Councillor Mrs. Mason, I am sorry you can't get the paperwork, but that is no problem that we can resolve here now. I'm afraid that is an issue that you need to deal with prior to these meetings with officers, but we cannot keep going down the road that you have not had the paperwork when we get to these meetings. I'm very sorry about that, but I can't do anything at this stage on that issue.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I'm not expecting you to, far from it. I've actually said that it's nothing we can deal with here. It's something that the officers haven't been able to resolve, and it's put me at a disadvantage. So to say that I've had the opportunity to come back on these things is incorrect. So I do want clarity and the information that you're giving to be accurate, and it's not. Nevertheless, I have the access to the public documents and I have been able to read the reports. And again, I propose that the resolution, the recommendation is slightly, the wording is slightly altered. Thank you.
Well, I don't believe it would be appropriate to start changing all the wording again. The proposal is, as the recommendation says at the paragraph 9.1, as stated on this document that has been submitted, and I hope that members will, it is noted. Now, we can quite happily report, Councillor Mason, that you do not necessarily agree fully with it, and I'm quite happy for Sonia to record that. But in the meantime, I think we should publish what has been agreed up until this point on the website.
Can I ask you to chair the meeting, and by asking if there's a seconder before you decline the motion?
Okay, is there
I'll
a
second that. I'll second that, Councillor Sperring, for you, no problem.
Thank you.
Which are you seconding, Councillor Weston?
I'm seconding for you as the proposal of the minutes as they are at the moment, as going forward, Councillor.
Thank you very much.
Sorry, if on a point of order, I've had my hand raised for some time.
Okay, Councillor Hoy.
I've been bypassed.
No, you haven't been bypassed. You're being asked to speak now.
Well, I'm slightly unclear what happened because I was here to second Councillor Mrs Mason's proposal.
Okay, well, you can counsel. Well, then if we need to take Councillor Weston, do you want to come in?
Not this time, Councillor Sperry.
Sorry, Councillor Wooden, sorry.
Chairman, thank you very much indeed. Chairman, I just want to go back to basics here. We have a report where 9.1 is a noting of the appendix. Then if I go to the appendix, Chairman, on just after the heading pages, it is quite clear the advisory notes. And I agree totally with what the advisory note says, and I agree with you, Chairman, that this was talked about at length at the working groups. It is almost the first thing that you read apart from the title pages. If we are now saying that we add as the minutes that note, we may as well start going through the whole of the report, adding all the salient points of the rest of the report in the minutes. By implication, the minutes say that they will note the point, or they will note the appendix document, and I don't really see why we need to add further information in the minutes. It's an issue of the minutes we're talking about, not the report itself. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Well, we now have a proposal from Councillor Mrs Mason, and we have a seconder. I think we were going to now have to go to a vote on this, Sonia.
Chairman, can I just clarify? My understanding in trying to follow things is that you've moved the recommendation, which Councillor Mrs Weston has seconded, but I believe that Councillor Mrs Mason has moved an amendment to that recommendation, asking for additional text to be included. But I think you need to allow Councillor Hoy an opportunity to second that proposed amendment to the motion, so that that can be debated.
If I can clarify, the officer, and the procedure that happened was I moved a motion which was the chairman overspoke without asking for a seconder or allowing a seconder, and Councillor Hoy was correct. His hand was up. Councillor Lumley's Weston's hand was not up. And then he took a seconder on his own motion. So actually the first motion was ignored. The motion on the table is the one that Councillor Sperring put, and we'll have to now put an amendment to that, to my original motion, because it wasn't taken in a democratic or sequential manner.
So we will now vote, Sonia, on Mrs Mason's amendment, seconded by Councillor Hoy. That is correct.
Would you like me to clarify the amendment?
Yes, please. And I think out of courtesy, it would be good to allow Councillor Hoy the opportunity to speak to seconding that amendment, Chairman.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, would you like me to clarify?
I thought Councillor Hoy was going to speak, but he hasn't indicated that he wishes to speak.
Sorry, I think there's a lot of confusion going on. I thought Councillor Mrs Mason was first going to clarify the amendment, and then I'm happy to speak.
Okay, well, let's go down that road then. Councillor Mrs Mason, over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Right, for clarity, the only thing that we're suggesting on the report to be altered is the recommendation 9.1. 9.1, it is proposed that the committee resolves to note the HELA in the knowledge that it holds no status as part of the development plan. Okay. Thank you.
Councillor Hoy, do you want to speak?
Thank you, Chairman. Just briefly, I'm seconding this on the basis of things I've said in the past, both in the working groups and outside, in that clarity's needed for residents. If this is in the recommendation, it's there very clearly for residents to see. Makes it much plainer than it would otherwise. They don't have to go hunting through the appendices or for the full report to find this bit. To you, or to me, or to other members of this committee, it might be quite straightforward to find, but it isn't necessary to residents. or the understanding. I think it just gives the clarity, and I think clarity is really required in this on this subject. Thank you.
Well, you've heard the comments, members. You've also heard Councillor Wotton's comments that he believes, as I do, and a motion that I've said or comments that I've made, that we've already covered this aspect fully in the articles that we've added to the preceding parts of this report. It's now, I guess, Sonia, whether members wish to vote to support Councillor Mrs Mason's amendments, or if we stay with what is already on the working papers that have been sent out. So I'll leave you to take the vote on whether we go with the amendment or leave it as it is.
Members, can I first clarify, can you please click on your raised hand icon if you want a recorded vote? No, in which case, if you could please click on your raised hand icon if you wish to vote in favour of the amendment to the motion.
Can you please vote record my vote as in favour of the amendment, please?
Certainly.
Can you note mine as well, please?
Indeed. And if you could please, I'll remove those for you. And now if those against the amendment to the motion, if you could please click on your raised hand icon. Thank you. Lauren, if you could take those down for me, please. Chairman, there were 2 votes in favour of the motion and 4 against, so the amendment to the motion is lost.
Okay, thank you. Do we now have to have another vote to support the statement already that at paragraph 9.1, or is
yes.
that okay? If you would like to, I would propose, and Councillor Weston a second, that what has already been proposed at paragraph 9.1 on page 5.4. It is proposed that the committee resolves to note the header at Appendix A and publish it on the council's website.
So again, Chairman, if members could please click on their raised hand icon if they are in favour of the motion as moved by Councillor Sperring. Thank you. If you could take those raised hands down for me, please. Thank you. And then if those who would like to vote against the motion as moved by Councillor Sperring, if you could please click on your raised hand icons now. If you wish to abstain, if you'd like to click on your raised hand icons. Thank you. Chairman, that motion is approved.
Thank you, members. We will now move on to agenda item number 6, the new local plan evidence-based urban capacity study. Back over to you, Daniel.
Thank you, Chair. The urban capacity study similarly is an evidence-based report that's been prepared to inform Council's new local plan. Similarly to the HELA, it is about land availability and capacity. So again, it's about informing a judgment of how much housing can be accommodated in the district under certain assumptions. And really, the study has looked at the council, or the district's urban areas, all land outside of its greenbelt, and sought to identify the capacity of available land for housing over the next 20 years. I think an important point just to emphasise, and something that has been mentioned previously, is there are certain aspects of the report which are relatively hypothetical, or they're conditional on decisions that the study isn't intending to prejudice, particularly when it's exploring the capacity of land in a sense that wouldn't meet current policy. So notwithstanding the fact that the council could make a decision in the future to seek to maximise that urban capacity, I think it's important to emphasise that some of those figures do not meet current policy, and therefore limited weight should be attached to them. Just to conclude, really, the urban capacity study concludes that there's around 2,800 homes that could be delivered on urban sites on, again, deliverable or developable pieces of land. That compares to obviously the figures in the HELAR. It's slightly lower because the HELAR is inclusive of non-urban land. And I think just the point that I mentioned before, just to say that again, I mean, 1,700 homes are identified in the study as being theoretically possible on sites such as existing allocations. However, that is described as theoretical because the study hasn't done a detailed assessment of the impacts of that decision, and it makes no implication that would be a sustainable option, other than to say that in simple mathematic terms, if you like, a higher number of houses could fit on those sites. So that's all I'd like to say really on that at the moment, Chair. Again, I'm happy to answer questions on that study as previously.
Thank you, Daniel. Well, members, I think we've been through an awful lot of this before in the two working groups. Are there any further questions for Daniel? I can't see anything. Then at paragraph 9.1 on page 6.6, there is a recommendation.
Sorry, Mr.
Chair.
Sorry, Councillor Mrs. Mason, I hadn't seen your hand.
No, that was a problem. Something came up on the laptop that just said I wish I had to update something, so I couldn't get on to actually indicate. I lost my reference on this. I think it was 7.88. I'm just looking for it to see where the issue is. Yes. If I refer you to, not on the actual report, but on the appendix, the page 6.43, and just so you're aware, Mr. Chairman, this has been raised on more than one occasion, just so you're aware of it. 6.43, 7.88. We have here, I mean, it's not a big issue, but it's a very important issue when we're talking about public clarity and information. And the newer members of this committee won't realise that this issue has been raised year in, year out, again and again, and has been failed to be addressed. And 7.88, SER1, okay. But look at the directions, SER4, South Hawkwell is in West Hawkwell. SER8, South East Ashington, is in Roach North and Rural. When this is published, residents look at South Hawkwell. We do not have a South Hawkwell designation. We do not have South East Ashington in the middle of Roach North and Rural either, if it comes to that. So those are just two examples. Now I realise that these descriptions have been used for some years, but we've also asked for some years for there to be greater clarity and to be the ward, or to put the actual location. In other words, if you must call it South Hawkwell when it's not, put Hawkwell West Ward in. If you've West Rochford, put the ward in, so that residents know what we're talking about. This has the presumably unintentional way of hiding where the real locations are, and it means that residents that read this very lengthy report, if I was not a councillor and I read this report, I'd go down and say, oh, there's nothing that affects me. That's good. South Hawkwell is right next door to me and I live in West Hawkwell. So I would like that addressed. We have requested it before on many occasions, and it's further down as well in the report. It's a small point, but I think when we're talking about transparency, we're talking about a document that's going to be made public. We want to make sure that the public have the best possible chance of understanding it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mrs. Mason. Councillor Wotton.
Thank you, Chairman. I put my hand up before knowing the point that Councillor Mrs. Mason was going to make, and I totally agree with her. The descriptions of our areas should be current and topical and understandable to the directly understandable to the readership. So that is a point in support of Mrs. Mason. But the point I was actually going to make was, without, dare I say, labouring from the previous point, the reason I couldn't support the amendment to the motion was because the minutes and the reports are not published on our website as such. It is these documents. But the advisory note on 6.9, I believe, should be boldened up and prettied up so that it is much more obvious to the readership, because notwithstanding our previous discussion, it is an important factor. And unlike the previous report, the Haller report, this is just in the normal text. So I would ask that it is boldened up to draw the importance of the point to the readership. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay.
If
Can
I
you,
could just clarify that both reports are on the website, that's where I'm reading them from. So, but I've got no objection with what Councillor Wootton said, but both reports are on the website. And if I may just make one other point, Councillor Wootton, if you'll excuse me for that. The other thing I have found is I'm reading them on the website. You can enlarge the forms, which is fine for the written word. You enlarge the maps, they become totally indistinct. I think for a public document, we need to have the clarity on those maps so that when members of the public enlarge them, which they're bound to do, they don't lose the definition. It's a small point, but again, it's an important one for transparency and public perception of clarity. Thank you.
thank you. Councillor Mrs. Weston.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I like Councillor Wootton, I agree with Councillor Mrs. Mason wholeheartedly, and we did discuss this before.
Yep.
We did say, and I think we've got to be careful of how we call these walls, because our residents will get concerned and upset. So I totally accept what Councillor Mrs. Mason is saying, Chairman.
Okay. Members, can we agree in principle that we go along with the recommendation that we publish, but that Mr. Goodman takes on board and officers take on board the comments that have just been made, and before anything further is done, those amendments are incorporated in the recommendation that goes forward, that these are published on the website, or the website is duly amended to reflect these views? Is that acceptable, members?
Councillor Mrs. Lumley is indicating, Chairman.
Yes, June.
I just wanted to agree with actually what's been said, because I made the point about the major developments being labelled as Rayleigh when they're actually in Raworth. And yeah, it's great marketing value to say they're Rayleigh, but actually they're not. So I thought I had read somewhere where some of that had been referenced now, but that may be in more local later documents rather than these. So totally.
Perhaps, Daniel, before you can speak to the four members that have highlighted this, or Mrs. Mason or Councillor Wootton, to make sure that this is clarified before we do anything further, but that in principle that we endorse that this is published on the website, but as with highlighting the issues that have just been raised. Okay, the members are in agreement with that? Okay. Moving on, members, agenda item number 7, which is the local plan, new local plan evidence-based Greenbelt study. Again, Daniel, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. So again, the Greenbelt study is an evidence-based document to inform the new local plan. It's quite an important piece of evidence in the sense that clearly a lot of the undeveloped land in Rochford is in the Greenbelt. And we obviously have growth pressures that mean that we're likely to have to critically explore, whether it is appropriate to release Greenbelt land for development. So the overarching purpose of the study is to consider the relative contribution that different areas of land make to the 5 Greenbelt purposes. And those 5 Greenbelt purposes are set out in national policy. And clearly, as you'd expect, there's a degree of variation across the district in terms of how much different parts of the district contribute differently to those 5 purposes. So the study's outputs do give a harm rating to areas of land that landowners and developers have put forward for development, if you like. I think it's important just to say that there's no implication that just because a piece of land would only have a modest impact if it was released, that makes it a good candidate for release. And on the other hand, just because a site would have a significant impact, that makes it a bad candidate, because I think we all accept that when decisions are made about development, you have to take into account a wide array of different factors. And it could be, in theory, that the most sustainable piece of land in the entire district from a housing perspective happens to be in quite a precious area of greenbelt. Conversely, a poorly performing piece of greenbelt might be unsuitable for other reasons. For example, it could be underwater 6 months of the year. So I think it's important that not too much weight is attached to individual site conclusions, but obviously it's an important piece of evidence to consider amongst other studies when the council has to make decisions in the future. And again, I'm happy to take any questions.
Yeah, thank you. Councillor Hoy.
Thank you, Chairman. Sorry for the delays in my pressing unmute. Just a small point and very parochial again, as always with Holbridge. I note that you're proposing to remove some greenbelt classification along the southern edge of the River Crouch, roughly from the main slipway to the Yacht Club slipway. I know it's a small area. I know it's probably unlikely to be developed. I just find this is obviously you've got the I can never remember what it's called, the coastal protection area,
yeah,
which borders. I think if we are removing albeit small, but to my mind important area of green belt, which would be quite important in keeping the openness of the area, in my view, I think it's quite dangerous. Obviously this borders a yacht club and the Anchor Inn on the bank, which could encourage additional development in that area. I'm just a bit worried about it is quite small, but it has quite a big benefit to keeping the openness of the area, in my opinion. That's what I want to say. I think I can keep rambling for ages about it, but I don't want to. That's the point I'm trying to make.
May I come back on that, Chair?
Yeah, sure. I'd appreciate it.
Just for clarity, I'm assuming, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that we're talking about the section that's to do with minor alterations to the greenbelt, rather than a parcel of land that's been identified elsewhere.
Didn't give the page.
I think it's just important to clarify that the study is not in itself changing, obviously, the greenbelt status of any of that land. I think the purpose of that exercise is that the consultant that has done this study has looked at areas where I hesitant to use the word, but I'm going to use it anyway, where there perhaps are anomalies. Sometimes these can be drawing errors where the greenbelt has been drawn, perhaps in a pre-digital time, and it leaves perhaps anomalies. And I don't know whether or not, I suspect that this is an area where, in the consultant's opinion, the case for it being greenbelt is in some way undermined by something like I've described. But I think what's important to emphasise, I suppose, is that this document does not in any way change the greenbelt status of that land. The only way greenbelt land can ever be changed is obviously through the examination of a local plan, and so it's totally in the council's gift to not put that piece of land forward as a greenbelt amendment when the local plan goes to be submitted to government, if in the opinion of council, actually the consultant's opinion on that piece of land is incorrect. I suppose that's true of all of this evidence, really. When it's done by consultants, it's a professional opinion that we can weigh up. But again, you know, to use that word again, we're not bound by what they've suggested, provided obviously we have a good rationale for going against it. So I suppose I totally understand the point that you're raising, and I think if council agree with you, then you know there's no pressure, if you like, to include that as a greenbelt alteration. But clearly the consultant has put it forward that something in their opinion is, you know, either anomalous or very weakly performing. I hope that makes more sense than it probably sounded like.
No, thank you, Daniel. That's what I wanted to hear. Thank you.
Councillor Mrs Mason.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think Daniel's covered part of my concerns. That I must admit, alarm bells always ring when you hear of anything being removed from the green belt, and on the understanding that this doesn't is just a recommendation and not one that's going to necessarily go any further. Yeah, I'll accept that. But the one thing is just a small question. I'd like, you put the green belt definitions as strong or weak. Who decides on that? I mean, it sounds quite subjective to me. Are there any objective assessments on strength and weaknesses of the value of green belt, or is it just a subjective experience, shall we say, measurement? Because it does seem that we're putting quite a lot of weight on that. I know it doesn't stop or promote development, but on the other hand, again, going back to the public, if they see those categories, they could be concerned. So I'd just like a greater understanding of the who determines strong or weak and how. You know, is there an objective assessment? Have I clarified that right, Daniel?
Yeah.
Yes. So in the study, there are two main stages. I think the first stage is effectively that the consultant, you know, and it is their professional judgment. You know, I suppose they have done these up and down the country, hence why we're comfortable going with them. But it is a judgment. Have parcelled up the district, and then there are individual assessments of how strongly or weakly each of those parcels contributes to each of the 5 purposes of Greenbelt. And because those purposes are things like preventing the coalescence of neighbouring towns, you know, I mean, it is a judgment from that consultant as to whether or not a piece of land, you know, let's say it's one of those areas of land that are between kind of Rayleigh and Eastwood, you know, that might quite clearly be strongly performing against that criterion. And then you might say actually a piece of land out by Pagglesham clearly isn't as strong. So there isn't really a quantifiable way of doing that exercise. It is a judgment, but obviously it's not a judgment where they have tried to, if you like, assess all 5 in one go, and you've got maybe averaging out, and it's all gone a bit. It's all quite hard to follow. The fact that they have assessed it against all 5 individually means it's quite easy, in theory, to dig deeper. You know, should council want to, if you like, interrogate the reasons why a certain piece of land has reached a certain score, it should be relatively easy to track back the consultant's logic. I think the second stage is obviously the harm assessment, and that's a reflection of how strongly the parcel has performed in the first stage, but they also introduce other, again, you know, subjective factors, such as, you know, containment, for example, where, you know, if you've got a piece of land that's bordered on 3 sides by the urban area, then it's quite hard to say that would be harmful to the green belt in relative terms, because actually on 3 sides it's already urbanized, if that makes sense. So I think the easiest way to answer your question is it is a subjective professional judgment, but I would hope that the multi-staged aspect of the study means that should we get to a point in the next year or two where we want to interrogate the performance of pieces of land in more detail, that the study would allow us to do that quite easily.
I was very concerned about the large tranche that they wanted to remove on the east of the B1013, which I accept what you're saying, but that would create a coalescence. So, which is partly why I was asking the question, because doesn't seem, it's concerning, put it that way. But on the understanding that this is subjective, then I suppose there's nothing we can do about it. It is the consultants that Southend or we chose, I don't know who chose them, but were employed, and it's their opinion. But I am concerned it doesn't take into account local opinion, but presumably that will come later on in the stage of the development of the plan.
Thank you, Councillor Mrs. Payne. Daniel, can I just I mean, this is what we keep putting in the front of the documentation. This is a standard report that we have received. Anything that we want to alter will have to come to full council to make any alterations that full council deem appropriate. It is not just because they put it in the report, but it's statutory move. Anything that they recommend, we will consider on a case-by-case basis as and when it arises. Is that correct?
Yes, so I think that's true of all evidence, really. It's there to inform decisions. It's not there to make decisions, but clearly when you do make decisions, you want your evidence to support them to a large extent. But that's not, again, I mean, it's not about binding the council to any decision. Greenbelt release can only happen on the adoption of a sound local plan, and that means council approval probably on multiple occasions, plus a government inspector approving it. So certainly the evidence is only there to advise. I think it's probably the best word I can use to describe its role.
Okay, members, I think we've reiterated the situation and clarified that nothing will happen without full council rubber stamping it, approving it, whichever phrase you want. So on that basis, there is a recommendation, paragraph 9.1 on page 7.4 is proposed the committee resolves to note the Greenbelt study at Appendix A and publish it on the council's website. Are members in agreement?
Chairman, I think Councillor Ward is wishing to speak.
Go on, Ian.
Thank you very much indeed, Chairman. It's just picking up on what Councillor Wootton said about the advisory note. On this one, again, it's in italics, quite small. Can we make sure that throughout all the documents, it's the same type, all bold, Arial, whatever you want to use it, but please keep it the same type and it stands out. So it's very much in the reader's face the moment he opens that document up. If you can do that, please, Daniel. Thank you.
On that basis, members, we'll move on, taking that comment on all items, move on to agenda item number 8, which is the new local plan evidence-based landscape character, sensitivity and capacity study. Again, Daniel.
Thank you, Chair. So landscape character sensitivity and capacity study, it's another piece of technical evidence that's been assessed, similar in a sense to the Greenbelt study, in that it's looking at the performance of different parts of the district against, again, a subjective methodology. This time it looks at the character, sensitivity and capacity of different landscapes and townscapes as well, which I think is quite important. So similar to the Greenbelt study, again, it's not about binding the council to any decision. It's not about saying that this piece of land is, as a matter of fact, more appropriate for development than that piece of land. But again, it does provide the consultant's professional opinion on what kind of contribution different areas of the district make to landscape character, how sensitive those landscapes are, and their capacity for development, and that in a sense is, how much development could be accommodated before it starts to actually harm that landscape. So it's again there just to inform the new local plan. It's not there to bind any decisions, but it's another thing like the Greenbelt study and other studies that members have seen before and in the future, there to be considered as part of any strategy formation when it comes to looking at different areas of the district. That's, I suppose, all I probably would say at this point on the study. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. Well, I think we're pretty much back to Groundhog Day, members, with the situation. Councillor Mrs. Mason.
Yeah,
Hello?
just one point, the point that I raised on the other issue, that I'm reading these maps and the documents from the council's CMIS website, and as will members of the public be. The issue that we have on the maps is when they're enlarged, again, they're indistinct, and that does need to be resolved before these, I mean, these are draft documents, that's fair enough, but before they're permanently put in the public domain, they really should be tidied up, because if you're asking for someone to look at something, they're going to want to focus in on their local area. If they try to focus in on their local area, they're just going to get a grey splodge. And that is not I would think, the state of profession that we want to put on our websites, that people can't read. I mean, even the words in bold, like, can't read it. I think it's Foul Nest Ward, which is the wrong name anyway, but nevertheless, if, yeah, it can't be read. So something needs to be done by our IT people to resolve this on a permanent basis. But other than that, Mr. Chairman, I've got no comment, just a concern that we are putting documents out there that can't be read.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Mrs. Mason. Daniel, will you take that on board and sort that out with IT if it's at all possible, or what we can do to mitigate this situation?
Yes, I think probably what it is that when I have been sending these files around, I've been needing to compress them because of email limits and things like that. The actual core documents themselves have much higher resolution images, and those are the ones that will go on the website.
Thank you very much. Well, on that basis, and if you could make sure that any maps and areas to be defined, and also the bold print at the precede of any documents are doing. We now come to paragraph on this recommendation, paragraph 9.1 on page 8.4. It is proposed that committee resolves that the landscape character sensitivity and capacity study attached to Appendix A be noted as evidence and published on the council's website. Are members in agreement with that? Okay, members, thank you very much indeed. That concludes today's meeting. Thank you for attending, and I declare the meeting closed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman.